If you go there, you can sign up to get a calendar that reflects mental health awareness, so there was a little delay with the coming in. But if you'd like one, you can sign up, put your information, it'll get mailed to you as soon as they come in. So I did want to make sure everybody got a chance to do that before they left today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our second speaker. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Cheryl Meola, who is the visionary, what is it? Is it the oxytocin that's moving now? It's moving. Is the visionary founder of Main Source Counseling and Coaching and the co-founder of Horses and Health Incorporated. Her passion for horses began in childhood, hopping on ponies at her aunt's farm. At just 10 years old, Cheryl's life changed when her grandmother, Elsie, gifted her a horse, sparking a lifelong connection and commitment to equine care and training. With over 20 years of professional experience as a horse trainer, instructor, and intercollegiate coach, Cheryl transitioned to a new calling in counseling. She earned her master's in counseling from Bridgewater State University, where she discovered her passion for equine-assisted therapy under the mentorship of a local practitioner. Motivated to address the lack of experiential therapeutic opportunities in her new home of Eastern North Carolina, Cheryl facilitated equine-assisted therapy at several local farms. Please welcome Dr. Meola.
So most of us don't realize how far we've drifted from our own rhythms, the natural things that made us feel healthy, right? Until something breaks. Then we go to the doctor, then we talk to our friends, right? But we wait. We don't listen to those little things that our body tells us. And so what usually breaks first? Our body, our relationship, our sense of joy, finding those little moments and those little hobbies that make us feel human again. And I want to just offer our mindset shift that maybe these breaks that we experience are not weaknesses. This is just our internal wisdom trying to speak. So today I want to kind of help you remember, and also it's always a really great reminder to myself, that our bodies know the best. And they know the beat that we need to thrive, right? How many of you ever feel during the day like just kind of dysregulated? Right? And then on top of that, like, your phone goes off. Or you're like deep in thought about something and an email pops up, or someone walks to your door, or your baby cries, or whatever it might be, right? How do you stay connected to what matters? Because that's a huge part of our physical and mental health. So today, let's try to take the next hour to listen, not just to me, but to ourselves and what's going on around us. So I have retitled my presentation. People love that when I do that. The rhythm remedy, why their persistent regulation is the revolution we've been waiting for. So I wanted to kind of pop this up there and think about it for a minute, but you are unhealthy. We all are, right? I don't mean that you're broken, and I don't mean that you're lazy or flawed or that you're not trying hard enough. I mean that you are trying to live to a rhythm that you cannot possibly sustain, right? It's a reasonably impossible life. And our systems demand output without rest. Our jobs, our kids' schools and extracurricular activities, our parents, our friends, our hobbies, our pets, right? We put all these things on our plate that we are in charge of, and then we continue to give and give without rest. I think But there's care without being cared for. And so you are unhealthy, but it's not your fault, but it is your body's choice. So we're going to talk a little bit about the disconnection going on. Our modern lives are not rhythmless. They're full of disturbed rhythms, right? I bet that all of us could probably stop and think of some place that you like to go where maybe you find some rhythm. For me, and this was like pre-COVID, but I still remember I started going tanning, which is like totally bad. I have a history of melanoma in my family. But I enjoyed it so much. It was at my gym for free. And I was like, this is nice, right? You can bring your phone in, there's no sound, there's no visual stimulation. And I was like, this is amazing for 5 minutes a day. But in our overall lives, there's no breath, no pause. Sometimes we're not even aware of the seasons because we're indoors so much. We have constant notifications, constant demands. We have answers at our fingertips. I used to sit and think about things I wonder how that works. And now I can just look it up. What's my brain even doing again? I don't know. But it doesn't give us that rhythm, right? So we're overstimulated. And we're increasingly isolated because we can do so many things by ourselves now. And even just having the opportunity to talk to people more virtually sometimes makes us more isolated because we are not co-regulating, right? We're not feeling the rhythm of other people. And again, we're pushed to perform systems that are designed for productivity and not our humanity. And so basically we're living outside of our biological design. And these diagnoses that we're all really fond of and that pay give us our paychecks, especially in private practice, these are really just our bodies sounding the alarm. And I was kind of thinking in the previous presentation, COVID was mentioned, right? Now, kids' mental health, that was also mentioned earlier. The numbers have just escalated drastically, right? And I think part of that might be our systems, and especially our kids' systems, which aren't so ordered by chaos or decades. We're it's kind of nice to stay home and be with my family and not go out and do all the things, or it's nice to go to the store and we have 10 people here, right? So maybe there's not an increase in mental health disorders, but there is an increase in pushback against systems that weren't built for us. Okay, and I'm not here to tell you to change your whole life, but I am here to say let's build a little bit of awareness in it and how it impacts the people we work with, right? So let's try this right now. We're going to practice thinking a little and playing a little bit of rhythm, right? So wherever you're sitting or standing, just try to see if you can find some sort of rhythm that feels good. Maybe a little sway in your chair, maybe a little, whatever feels good. See if you can find a beat internally that you can match, or externally. And then become a little bit aware of the rhythms around you too. Now, do you notice other people swaying? Does it convince you to sway one way or another? Okay. I used to work in an office all the time, just like a lot of us. I had a window, which was great in my second office, first one though. Now I work outside office all the time. I have an office. I took the AC out of it because I don't need an AC office. And I sit outside a lot. I have a little 3-acre farm, and that's where I do my therapy. We have lots of animals. And I have noticed a huge change in my mental and physical health. I feel a lot better than I did 10 years ago. And I know that we don't all have that available, but it has really helped me understand why rhythm and natural rhythms are so important to our mental and physical health. So, being the research nerd I am, I did some science research on this, okay? And I came up with some terms I wanted you guys to know, at least be aware of if you haven't heard them before. And the first one is physiological entrainment. How many people have heard of, studied, looked at entrainment at all biologically? So entrainment is that feeling you get when you're with thousands of strangers and you go to a live concert of your favorite band, right? And you're all in sync together like your best friend, you know each other for life. Or sometimes we get that at sporting events or cooking, whatever cooking extravagances, whatever it is that really you're passionate about. That's an example of physiological entrainment. But it's kind of crazy because we do it with plants, we do it with the ground, we do it when we shift our excited about, right? Because we're out in nature, we're with animals. I was looking at how they're doing this with people who have a diagnosis of autism and they're nonverbal, and they're finding that they actually communicate more with us than we realize. Like, there's this, has anyone ever heard of telepathy tapes? I'm going off on a tangent now. It's this Harvard researcher who's been like interviewing families of kids with nonverbal autism, and they're finding that they're almost telepathic because they are so in tune and physiologically trained to people around them. Somebody was telling me about it because one of the studies, the girl gets paid, or the family gets paid to go talk to show horses before they go in the ring about what's going on with them biologically. I mean, it's crazy, right? But this is actually starting to get backed by science. Like, we have researchers getting lots of grants to study this. So physiological training. Some of the cool things in research, it enhances cognitive processing and motor coordination by aligning neural oscillations with external rhythms. So I practice this in front of my 11-year-old son because he's my only captive audience. He's like, no idea what that means. So I'm like, well, when you go walking in the woods, and you're talking, you start walking the same, right? And your legs match, strides match, and you start breathing the same, right? That's the entrainment, and it enhances cognitive processing. How many have like walked and talked in a therapy session before, either as a client or a counselor? Anyone? I know Allie has. Well, a lot of times you'll get stuff from your client, or you'll say things that you didn't even know you needed to say because you're syncing with that person next to you, and you not only feel safer when you're synced up, but your brain works better, which is pretty cool. And our emotional well-being. So the synchronization, the rhythmic synchronization, positively impacts your affective functioning, so your emotional regulation, and it contributes to emotional regulation between each other and social bonding, right? So bouncing a ball back and forth can give you that feeling, right? Being on the same team as someone and coordinating movement. So it's not always synchronization. Entrainment and synchronization are not exactly the same thing, right? Synchronize is exactly the same, and train is like moving in rhythm together, like a symphony almost. And then therapeutic applications for this, right? Anything that's an entrainment-based intervention. Anyone ever heard music therapy or participated in it in some way, right? Drum circle, anything like that. That's another example, and a way that we can apply this therapeutically is finding ways to enhance the rhythms around us and how to get past some of our clients' barriers to engage with that. So I'm going to show you a little example. We practice to make sure the audio works, so hopefully it does. This isn't going to sound great at first, but we're just going to listen to it for a minute, and we're going to see an example of entrainment occur. See if it works. Did it work? Press the button on here. Okay. it takes to have everyone around them be in sync again, and it's just a natural process. I think it's so cool that sound does that, right? The sound and the vibration, right? So one of the ways I have studied this before is with mention. So some of the ways that we can incorporate this into everyday life, right? Because again, we're fighting systems that aren't looking for entrainment and rhythm and count, they're looking for, monetary gain and productivity, is to incorporate rhythmic elements into everything we do, right? I'm emphasizing therapeutic practices here, but playing music at work, right? Taking a break, going for a walk, having that rhythm, playing music, listening. When you're doing like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, a lot of times we're focusing on external things. Think about like internal. What are the things that you feel inside you? What do you hear inside you? What rhythms are available inside? So we can actually enhance treatment outcomes through paying attention to physiological entrainment. One of the things that we say in equine-assisted therapy is the horse doesn't know who the client is, right? If Ellie and I had an interaction that wasn't pleasant, and then we have to go facilitate a session together, the horse is going to pick up on that, and they're not going to pick up on what's going on with the client. So I've just like lost a huge source of information on what I'm doing, right? Because they're picking up on what's going on internally around, just the same as us, right? So paying attention to what kind of rhythms are going on behind the scenes makes a huge impact for not only our clients, but for our own like physical, mental health. So we want to emphasize the interconnectedness of mind and body and processing, and then responding to environmental stimuli. Anything like talking about this little that comes to mind that you do on a day-to-day basis, either for yourself or the people you work with, or that you'd like to do, that would help this a little? Looking for ideas. Anyone listen to music? Okay, what else? Do we bring animals to work ever?
What's your question?
Like, what do you do on a regular basis, or what does this make you want to do in terms of integrating entrainment and rhythm in a healthy way?
Instead of just listening to music, playing music, so you could be in control of how you were making beats as well.
Creating beats. Is there anything that you're doing right now on a regular basis that just makes you not want to do it anymore? I know this is how I ended up in Aiden on the farm. Okay. Another thing I wanted to throw out at you guys is chronobiology. Has anyone come across this before? Sometimes when we're researching our own sleep issues, right? That's when I first heard this, was when my teenager started sleeping all day and being up at night. Turns out that's kind of normal for that age, but I didn't know that at the time. But it's the study of biological rhythms. So we have, our circadian rhythm is one that we know about, right? We've got seasonal ones. Sometimes my rhythm naturally might be very different than yours, right? But if you think about the way our biology was made, that makes sense, right? Because if I'm up during the day and you're up during the night, then our group's going to stay safe. But if we're all up during the day and we all sleep at night, that's not very good for survival, right? So oftentimes we fight against modern life's rhythms because of what we're learning in chronobiology is actually totally normal for our own natural rhythms. we've always done and what everyone else around us may or may not be doing. So anyway, these rhythms not only affect our mental health and our physical health, it's like everything in between there. Our hormones, our cognition, our moods, and our sleep, and our immune function, and how much sleep we get, right? How many times we get sick. All of these in between things too. So I found this quote, I can't remember where I got it, but maybe this is the right citation, but that's the citation for chronobiology. To live well is to live in rhythm with light, sleep, others, and oneself. So if you can kind of look at those 4 areas in your life and think about what the rhythm is like for you. Is bedtime chaos in your household, or is it like nice and quiet and you can ease into it? What about the first hour you wake up in the morning? What's that like? Right? Are you trying to get ready for work, get people to school, make sure like your parents have all their meds before you leave for the day, or your dog is fed, right? How can you find some rhythm in that so that you're starting and ending your days in a better place mentally and physically? So again, like a lot of the things that modern life is pushing on us and pushing on the systems that we work in and the systems that our clients are stuck in, do not work with our chronobiology, right? They don't work with what we're learning is natural for us. So industrial and post-industrial societies have disrupted all those natural rhythms all the way down to what time we get up and what time we go to bed, right? It's not about daylight anymore. We have a 24/7 culture. We have lots of artificial light, although this room is lovely with its natural light. We have introduced shift work. The school and work schedules we kind of are tied to. And then this idea of constant connectivity. Has anyone heard of the term social jet lag? Has anyone experienced it? Right, sometimes we live in a constant state of it, right? So desynchronization has become biomedicalized. It's seen as a personal health failure rather than a systemic problem. And a lot of times when people come to me, they're not looking at it this way. They're saying, what's wrong with me, right? I recently started looking at process-based therapy. I had never heard of that before, or at least didn't come across it in my research, but it's that idea that like, what is going on around you and how are the systems causing these failures to your natural way of being, right? I mean, it sounds similar to other therapies, but I love the idea because it's non-biomedicalizing it, and it's saying, okay, what's wrong with what's around you so that we can fix what's going on with you. Impacts of desynchronization, so we've got higher rates of depression, anxiety, metabolic disorders, burnout, and chronic inflammation. We have vulnerable populations, so shift workers is another big one because their cycles are all pumped up. We have single parents, right, because they don't have the support of a colony sometimes or a plan to help them. And low-income workers, right, who have so many other stressors going on, sometimes unsafe housing to go home to, insecure transportation to and from work. And so these vulnerable populations experience the brunt of the misalignment between the systems we're working in and what our bodies do. And so this comes down to the idea that, you know, this desynchronization is a justice issue as well that we're facing and that our clients are facing and that we need to be aware of, right? Rhythm and living comfortably in a rhythm is a luxury in this day and age. Okay, I think it used to be more the norm, but now we have to look at the idea that the more that we fit into these systems and we succeed, honestly, I think the more of a detriment it can be to our mental health. And then we have the people on the outskirts who can't even function in the systems because it's so destabilized. So chronobiology isn't just science, it's a reclamation of what the nervous system was designed for: rhythm, rest, and relational time. So those are the 3 things that I look at when I do an intake on a new client now. What kind of rhythms are going on in their life, internally and externally, right? That's part of biological, psychosocial. What do they do for rest, and what does rest look like? Not just sleeping, but downtime. And then relational time. What does it look like when they interact with their support system? Not just what is their support system. everybody's feet next to me and get synchronized, right? A lot of us are good at that because we're caretakers and we're nurturers. We naturally integrate with others easily. So what happens when you're working with a chronically sick population, whether it's physical illness or mental illness? You're chronically stabilizing destabilized people. Or you're slipping into empathy and you're letting yourself destabilize to connect, right? And so what that leads to is burnout. So when empathy screws up our rhythm, how many of us consider ourselves empathetic people? Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what empathy is doing in our brains, right? We just talked about all those hormones, like the feel-good hormones, empathy. Guess which hormone empathy produces? Any guesses? Cortisol. That wasn't even on our list, right? Because it's not a feel-good hormone. It's our junkie-driven stress hormone, right? Because we get into, it hijacks our nervous system and we get into fight, flight, freeze. How am I gonna make you feel better so I feel better, right? And imagine jumping into that system every time you work with a client. That's what a lot of us are doing. How many of you have heard the term compassion fatigue? Right? There's actually no such thing as what science is telling us, because I've done a lot of deep dives in this research, and if you look at stuff from 2023 on, what we're learning is it's actually empathetic distress. Because compassion, and we can get in, I think we get into that in a few slides, but compassion actually does give us those feel-good hormones. It activates the part of our brain that lets us pick up GABA, dopamine, all that great stuff, right? It's almost impossible to have compassion fatigue. Empathetic distress can happen after one bad interaction, never mind like a whole death. So when we feel with someone instead of being with them, our body mirrors a dysregulation. We absorb instead of anchoring, and we react instead of responding. So we co-drown instead of co-regulate. And in a world where burnout is a badge in our system, and boundaries are blurry, empathy without regulation is a fast track solution. And I have been there. When I went into my PhD program, I was burnt out. I was like, I never want to see a client again. I'm going to do research about horses and I know people. Right? And I'm glad that I got through that. And I'm not doing what I love. But I was so burnt out, not really by the interaction with my clients so much as fighting against the systems, right? Because when we start out in our field, obviously, we tend to work with clients that are working against the systems. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. It's where people take our interns, right? And that's where we stay sometimes. And it can happen really fast without even realizing what's going on. When you start paying attention to how you talk about clients with other clinicians, when you start thinking about how you're spending your free time. When I'm not reading research articles about counseling or equine-assisted services, I know I'm kind of burnt out, right? Because I love what I do and I love looking at it. So I know what my cues are for, like, I might be getting a little burnt out and need a break. So empathy is only helpful if you remember which nervous system is yours, right? So empathy is not something I'm saying we should never experience, but we need to learn to separate the process. It gives us lots of great info. So I put a picture of my horse Octavia up there. She's a horse I've had the longest in my herd right now, and she is a wonderful therapy partner. And not always because she's just willing to work with everyone. She doesn't always make my clients feel good, because if you're dysregulated, she's out. She's like, girl, I like you, but I'm not dealing with this, right? So much information on what's going on, not just with my client, but with me. And so I have learned so much from her about not taking on from others, but being there when they're ready to co-regulate and get better. So I'm gonna stay on this soapbox for one more minute and just say a couple of things that hopefully kind of give you just a mindset shift on that, or a better understanding of empathy versus compassion. So empathy says, I feel your pain. Compassion says, I'll walk with you towards healing. And empathy alone burns us out, but empathy plus compassion is what restores us, right? And then self-compassion, we learned, is the antidote to shame, hypervigilance, and the inner critic, right? And I think it's the next one. Yeah. There's this She said, how many of us have heard that the therapeutic alliance in counseling is the most important part of the healing process? Have any of you guys ever heard that? Like the relationship with the therapist or the social worker is the number one facilitator of change. I think I used to teach that, never believe it as well. And what she said is our relationships and our self-compassion with ourselves is the most important piece, right? Because when you're sitting across from someone, you can know pretty quick if they love themselves or not, right? I mean, there's just a felt sense of that. And the more that we can let go of those things internally, the more we can help others around us, the less likely we are to burn out, the more likely we are to find those rhythms around us and keep ourselves sane and healthy in all the challenges that are facing us in this current modern lifestyle. So, just this idea of self-compassion and then diving into the research that is out there in self-compassion changed everything in my life. It changed the way I teach, it changed my clinical work, it changed my parenting, and it changed the way I take care of my body. I wanted to mention, there was this moment when I was fighting against my kiddo. I have two boys, they're both equally challenging in very different ways. Instead of trying to fix it, one of them just got really frustrated with me. He's like, I don't want a solution. Stop, you don't understand. I was like, okay. I was like, I can understand that this is really hard. And you're still good. You're still okay. I can sit and listen and I don't have to fix this. Right? So choosing to be present over performance helped us both regulate, but it had a lot to do with self-compassion. My personal feelings of failure for not having a solution, for letting this happen in the first place, for not being the best mom, right? Were actually what I was responding with because I was in empathetic distress. I was like, you need to feel better so I feel better. Right? And when I could switch to compassion and say, I'm really listening to you and this sounds hard, literally changed the course of our relationship. Probably, it goes up and down like this every day, but it's definitely up here now instead of down here. And I realized that he didn't need me to fix it, he needed me to find that rhythm he was in, right? And co-regulate. Which I was totally okay doing since it was my son, but we don't want to do that day to day with our kids. And so, again, just saying, integrating things like being with others, spending time in nature, watching the way that the horses interact and connect, incorporating music into my work has changed my life and not just my clients. And if there are small ways that we can do this on an ongoing basis and we stay healthier, I think that we can help the people that we work with also integrate these things and stay healthier. So someone asked the question, what do you do when your client or the person you're working with is surrounded by toxicity, right? Teach them how to regulate their own internal rhythms so that they can move through it rather than getting stirred up by it, right? Because sometimes they can't change it. Sometimes it's their mom or it's their partner or it's their boss, right? And they can't get out of that situation right now. So finding those internal rhythms and how you sync up and being careful about putting boundaries on the things you don't want to sync up with, I think is what I would suggest there. And so I'm going to go back to the idea that you are unhealthy, and we all are, but it's not equitable, right? So what's been available for me, not everyone can go buy a farm and change their life like what they do, right? But what we can do is we can help people find what it is that's available to them, and then on a greater level is obviously make these things more available to more people, right? So I'm not trying to guilt anyone, I'm not trying to make myself feel guilty, but it's about biology, right? And it's about justice. So the ability to regulate and find rhythms around us that feel good is not equally distributed. And most of us weren't taught how to listen to rhythms. Some of us were. I was very lucky to spend a lot of time alone, a lot of time with animals growing up. And I think naturally found some rhythms that now I have a rational understanding of why it felt good, right? But a lot of us weren't taught. A lot of us were surrounded by things that didn't feel good. And there was no regulation. There was nothing to co-regulate to that felt good. So now we have to go back and find these rhythms that not only keep us alive, but they keep us healthy. They keep us out of fight, freeze, or at least a part of our being, right? So living in a had like the person who was in parasympathetic and the person in sympathetic, right? When we're living in that fight, flight, freeze, that's not rhythm, okay? That's dysregulation, because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for something in my situation that screams, I'm not safe. And I'm gonna cue into that, right? And I'm ignoring all the static or the calming rhythms around me because I don't feel safe. Our body is cued to do that because I could walk by all the bushes in the world that have berries I could eat, but if I step on the poison of a snake, I'm dead, right? So our bodies are cued in to find dysregulation, but if we live in that state constantly, that is not healthy. So, you can't empower someone to succeed in a dysregulated system. You can't self-actualize if your vagus nerve is constantly on high alert. And it's not just personal, it's political, and it's systemic. You know, like I noticed that when kids weren't flourishing in school, I pulled them out of school and homeschooled them. Can we all do that? No, that's like a privilege I have. It's a pain in the butt too, but it's a privilege I have, right? And we have to recognize that, like, we have to work at finding rhythms that work for people who don't actually have them around them, right? And again, like, sometimes we can't change the system. That's just the way it is, but we can teach people that it's the system and not them, and how they can find rhythms around them that do feel safe. I recently went through an EMDR training. I have mixed feelings about it really, but one of the things I really enjoy now is talking to my clients about their calm, safe space. Right? And just talking about, like, what is it about that calm, safe space? 99% of the time there's something with it that has to do with rhythm and regulation. Like it's swinging in a tree, it's sitting on the beach listening to the waves, it's being in my grandmother's rocking chair, right? There's something about it that in a dysregulating time or system, we found regulation. And so it can be done, but we have to recognize that it's not easy and it's not the same for everyone. So then I went down this other research dive that you guys are going to now be privy to, whether you want to or not. When the system is stacked against you, stress becomes a state of being, right? How many of us work with a lot of clients who live in a constant state of stress? And we're realizing it's not just their blood pressure, right? It's every system is affected by it. Chronic exposure to financial instability, unsafe neighborhoods, limited access to care, all of these things activate the body's stress response system again and again and again, right? And then we're going to go back to how can we help establish rhythms that feel better, that help people feel better and be better mentally and physically. It's my favorite time of day. Has anyone heard of allostatic mode? Okay, just another term. Sometimes I think it's great to have these terms, right? Because when we're talking to people advocating for systems change, or advocating for money, advocating for more services for people, sometimes having these words, and it adds to what we're talking about, right? It gives us a little more oomph to what we're saying. And so that's why I like to share them. So it's the wear and tear on the body and brain from long-term stress. I don't know if it's just me, but like I have tons of clients that come to me in their mid-30s to mid-40s who have like, you know, nothing's changed in my life. I'm doing all the same things I've always done. I just can't do it anymore, right? That is the wear and tear on your body and brain from long-term stress. It's like, hey, yeah, we've been doing this for decades and we're done, right? We need to find a new way of doing this. So not only does it lead to them coming to see me in therapy, but it leads to them going to doctors because now they're having cardiovascular issues, or having blood sugar issues, or having cognitive impairments, anxiety, depression, what is that called when you have immune issues, can't think of it, but like chronic immune system problems, things like that. I mean, again, this is not about personal weakness. We're not like a weaker species than we used to be. We're not a weaker generation or population. It's about all the systemic exposure to chronic threat. And it's not just physical threat, it's financial threat, it's status threat, it's transportation. I mean, there's a million different things out there that we could list, right? And we have to think about how those impact us, right? So again, you know, as a metaphor, it's kind of like we have this bucket, and if we don't plug these holes, and some of those holes are racism, poverty, food insecurity, unsafe housing, then we're continuously pouring in, and everything's just going out. And sometimes I think that's what it feels like we're doing, like professionally, right? We're putting all this out, and then when you look at the big picture, not much has changed, right? And so looking at what plugs those holes rather than what we're pouring in is what's going to help us like help others and then also help ourselves, right? So social supports, therapy, regulation, advocacy, community resources, and research. Okay, I tend to be like a huge research nerd because I feel like that's how we get buy-in from other people who actually make the changes, right? So what can we do to plug these holes? So I guess I'm still on this, yeah. I got like really excited about this part, but children from low-income families often show differences in brain development. Did you guys know that? Like now that we have these fMRIs and fMRIs that we can look at people's brains, like what happened to us growing up like makes a huge impact on who we are as adults, not just emotionally, mentally, behaviorally, but physically. So the research shows that the impacts of poverty and early brain development are like smaller volumes in the hippocampus, which is important for memory and learning, and in the prefrontal cortex, which helps with focus and emotional regulation. So when we're looking at statistics and we're comparing them in terms of like race, in terms of socioeconomic status, like are we thinking about the disparity in brain development that was caused by all these systems that people were looking at? And these brain changes, I mean, obviously we can understand like why having smaller capacity for memory and learning and emotional regulation impacts us, right? But it also increases anxiety and depression and struggles in school and learning, right? So again, like the communities that have these socioeconomic disadvantages have higher stress from chronic early life hardships, and then they have more stress-related health problems that are not from personal failure, but contribute to barriers being in place to find rhythm, regulation, and a life that feels good and looks healthy, right? And so again, the systemic inequities that overload our nervous system from a young age all the way up through adulthood is really where the change needs to happen, right? And so think about like what your role is right now in that system and the small changes that you can make to plug some of those holes. So what we all do have in common though is the same nervous system, right? So when we're looking at this research, it's a reminder that our nervous systems serve as common ground. So we can all put on some music, and it might not be our favorite music, but we can find a rhythm and we can co-regulate, right? Because our nervous systems are basically built the same. And the systemic factors that shape our bodies respond to stress, but they didn't build the system, right? So we can learn, we can work on it, and our systems are not always broken forever, right? Neuroplasticity, regenesis, and things like that. Like we can actually fix these things through rhythm and co-regulation. So we can work towards this by building compassion instead of blame, and creating solutions that support both individuals and the systems that we're working with. So again, we're all mammals co-regulate, and we all co-regulate rhythmically. That's how we learn to sustainably self-regulate in a world that's overwhelming, right? And that's why so many animals live in packs, herds, clans, whatever you want to call them, right? But for some reason, we understand that we need others, and then we like to look at ourselves as individual organisms that don't. Every human, regardless of background, is walking around with a nervous system that's doing its best to survive, right? And the idea, another thing that got kind of drilled into us in that EMDR training is our systems are always trying to work towards health. And that kind of makes me feel good, right? Like our systems, no matter what they've been through, want to feel healthier. And dysregulation is really the hidden root of so much of the anxiety, depression, chronic illness, burnout, and disconnection we experience. So remember what I'm saying, we may not like the music, but we might all actually like connect a little bit listening. You guys willing to try that for a minute? Okay. I tried to pick something that was like fun for me, but also like, pretty easy to relate to. This is my thinking music, so let's see if it works. How are we feeling? notice anything different about themselves, people around them, the atmosphere.
It was, we were able to just kind of be. It wasn't like they didn't feel forced.
Okay.
And with the crowd that we don't know that well, we all cooperated and it seemed calm, so worked.
Yeah, so, again, like, just little things throughout the day, 3 minutes or less, can make a huge impact on how we regulate where we are in space, how we're feeling what's going on around us with other people, right? So, thank you for, participating in our music listening. So where else can we find this in our day-to-day life, right? First place I always go to is nature, whether it's like walking around out here, taking your shoes off and standing on the grass for a minute. I like to say that it lives in hoofbeats, hammock sways, and moon cycles, because I have a lot of that in my life, and it feels really good. But it happens through rhythm, regulation, and relationship. And this is not something that we get to do after we worked a long day or after we put our kids to bed. This is not a luxury. It's ancestral wisdom that our body is telling us that we need. Right? How many of us only get our nature like on vacations? Going to the beach mountains. And we have to be careful that it doesn't become something we do after we do everything else. So a few key concepts, if you forget everything we talked about, you're like, what was that one word? They're all on one slide for you. That chronobiology provides a biological foundation for understanding nervous system regulation. When we're desynchronized, our capacity for co-regulation, emotional control, and stress resilience plummets. The ability to regulate is not just a skill, it's a privilege shaped by rhythm and access. That systems often strip people of their natural rhythm, and rest becomes a rebellion. Restoration of rhythm is a justice issue, not just a wellness luxury. And that we are not discounting